Under Armour Clone Magnetico 4 was probably one of the worst football boots from this past year, and it's because it's very clunky. It's got this really kind of pointless shot shield action, and they haven't really made any upgrades to it compared to its sibling, the Shadow 3, which is an excellent football boot. Today's video is all about the 5th generation of the new Magnetico, and they've made some subtle changes that I think are actually going to be pretty sweet. Let's jump into the unboxing. So you get a standard Under Armour box with this one, very, very similar to the rest of the Under Armour, unless you get the special edition stuff, but very much easy. Under Armour logo here, the full Under Armour name, and then of course you have the sizing on here with this insane looking black and white sort of digi camo looking colorway, very, very similar to what Nike did with the Tiempo Legend 8, which actually resells for well over the MSRP. This MSRP for $250, although the Magnetico has never held its value very well, unfortunately. These are in my usual size 9 US, a UK 8, a Euro 42.5, and a Euro 27 centimeters, the exact same sizing as my Nike sizing. So very, very similar. If you guys are interested in more sizing information, free size guide down below in the link in the description. All right, let's get these opened up. I have seen these in photos, but man, I am pumped to see them in person. Holy, look at those. Digi Camo Magnetico 5. Okay, so they feel softer, that's for sure. Kind of a similar heel area, although we'll remark on some of the differences in a sec. Same sole plate as before, which I actually didn't have that much of an issue with. And what an insane looking boot. Holy moly. Yeah, those are crazy. They seem to have gone back a little bit in terms of the upper. It feels a little bit more like the Magnetico 3 as opposed to the 4. The 4 just added a bunch of random stuff that really I don't think should have been part of that football boot. But here you go. There's that right boot as well. And let's get these out and put the box away. All right, here we go. So it almost, look at that, it almost blends in with my background. How crazy is that? Okay, so Magnetico 5. Let's go over some of the main pieces and parts of the Magnetico 5. First of all, we're gonna take all of the paper out as well, and I'm gonna show you what the kind of in-hand softness test feels like as we go through this. So you can see on the overhead cam, pretty good actually. That's actually not bad. It's much better. Just for comparison, I'll bring this guy over. And just for comparison, this one's like not very, it's pretty stiff, it's pretty thick. Here in the lacing area, it was a double layer upper, so almost going back to what they had with the original Shadow 1. Not necessarily a bad execution on the Shadow 1, but this feels like a massive, massive upgrade and feels much more like what the upgrade, the 4 probably should have been, given that the 3 was actually quite comfortable with this auxetic material, with the more general heel shape area. So this is their new clone upper, which is the auxetic base material that stretches and molds to your foot, and then over the top is a 3D printed texture with the silicone grip. So it's like a polyurethane coating, thin polyurethane coating over the top of that auxetic material. Now, for those of you who don't know, I've done this in every video. So auxetic material, for those who don't know, is basically a class of materials in, I don't know if it's actually in maths or if it's in chemistry or something, but it's essentially characterized by the negative Poisson's ratio or Poisson's ratio. It's probably some fancy French dude's name. And essentially, basically what that means is, unlike conventional materials that become thinner when stretched and thicker when put together, the negative Poisson's ratio is essentially the opposite of that. So when you compress them, they become thinner and they actually get wider because of the repeating geometric shapes on the inside. I hope that makes sense. Maybe we'll put a diagram up on screen to show you actually what that is. But essentially what that means for the upper is that the upper will stretch and mold to your foot and have enough material. The auxetic material is such that when it's really scrunched like it is here, it doesn't look like there's anything extra there, but then once it stretches around a foot, it actually still has more and more material, so it's able to hold larger foot shapes. That's kind of the idea. So something like this with a thinner upper as opposed to the previous generation, I think is going to do a pretty good job in terms of making it really easy for most foot shapes to fit in it. And that has actually been the case for pretty much all of the Magneticos that I can remember. They have all been quite comfortable straight out of the box, even if they do feel a little awkward on ball. The comfort, other than the Magnetico 4, has actually been really, really nice. You also have the Intellinet tongue area here, which, unlike the previous model that had this really weird kind of double layer situation in this area, and then I don't know what was going on with this kind of tunnel system. It was like an internal cage of Intellinet, and then they wrapped the auxetic material on the outside of it, and it was just way too thick and bulky. This new one takes a much more modern approach, and it's essentially melded into or stitched into that auxetic material. So if you were to lay all the elements flat on the ground, you would have the auxetic, kind of the strip like this of the auxetic upper, and then you'd have a knit material that then would be sewn, or in this case probably glued, to the lacing system area here, and then you have those black and white checkered laces as well. The heel area is the same, very padded, very neutral general heel area. It's probably going to fit most foot shapes. I honestly didn't have that many issues on the previous generation as well. And then your same sole plate as the previous generation with a mixed stud pattern, some conical studs, and some sort of half conical, half bladed here in the forefoot, and then you have bladed studs here in the rear. This stud pattern and sole plate isn't all that snappy, but it will definitely suffice for what I think most players are going to this boot for, which would be either one, something incredibly unique that not a lot of other players are wearing, or they're looking for something that's got that super, super comfortable and unique fit on feet, I guess, and on the ball, really, because this material really does kind of adapt to your foot better than most knit material does, in a way that's much more unique than a lot of standard knit materials or even grip knit from Nike. So this is a very unique product, and I'm actually quite excited to see what these are going to feel like on ball, particularly with some of the changes that they've made, sort of shaving down a lot of the BS that was on the previous model and going back to what I think people did really enjoy about the Magnetico 3, but with some of the upgrades of this new auxetic upper that actually feels pretty grippy and pretty nice in hand, at least. So I'm excited to try these on. Digi Camo colorway is pretty wonky in my opinion. It's not my favorite, but at the end of the day, it's definitely going to stand out and you will be seen on pitch. So if you're interested in something kind of crazy looking, this is definitely a good place to start. So without further ado, let's jump on pitch. All right, guys, out on pitch with the Magnetico 5. I am honestly a bit nervous about these simply because the tongue area, this Intellinet, is nowhere near as soft as the Shadow 3, which is made out of the same, theoretically, made out of the same material. That being said, the auxetic upper should be pretty good. So once I actually get my feet in these, it should be pretty good, but we will see. The Shadows have, or excuse me, the Magneticos, God, oh, wow, that is tight. But holy crap. I think for a lot of people, you're gonna find these actually are suited a little bit more narrow for most people. Compared to the new Shadow 3, because the new Shadow 3 is actually quite accommodating for most foot shapes, whereas this one feels a little bit more on the narrow side. Although, to be fair, this auxetic material already, I feel like, is wrapping around the shape of my foot, despite it being pretty tight straight out of the box. The laces are absolutely garbage. I will definitely, if I wear these ever again, I will be replacing the laces for sure. I'll probably go either white or black, or I'll do some crazy color. I don't know. But these laces are like really poor, if I'm honest. Okay, all right. Yeah, a little bit better there. Auxetic material feels much more forgiving than the 4, but little bit less forgiving than the 3. Sort of what I was saying in the unboxing portion of the video in terms of the stiffness of the upper. It sort of feels like it belongs kind of in the middle of them. The 4 obviously was just a mistake. They shouldn't have even produced that. Oof, wow. But getting into these boots is, I would say, a lot more difficult, partially because the 3 had a standalone tongue. The 4 had the Intellinet, but it was even stiffer than this. And so I'm interested to see from a ball touch perspective kind of where this actually goes, because I didn't find the Magnetico 3 to be all that difficult to play in and have like that bad of a touch, if you will, or that sort of disconnected of a touch. Whereas these ones feel like they wrap your foot so snugly, but it's not maybe as thin as those ones. Okay, I mean, look, Magnetico has never really been at the top of the control boot board in terms of, you know, this doesn't compare with Phantoms, this doesn't compare with Preds at all, but the general comfort is actually a pretty unique experience. This auxetic material is pretty unique in terms of, wow, I am going all over the place, but that's okay. It's an interesting experience because it feels like a knit, but it also kind of feels like a synthetic. And that's one of those things that I think Under Armour, when they created the Shadow, I was like, okay, you guys are going for a specific direction. That's awesome. The Magnetico to me has always been sort of a little bit of a confused product.
Looks like a cow.
It looks like a cow. It looks like a cow. You heard it here first. It does from a ways away, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, look, I think from a fit and comfort perspective, I think if you do fit in these boots, you're gonna, you're gonna feel absolutely fine. But, you know, again, it's not a boot that has a ton of like super close touch on the ball. You don't feel like you're playing in a speed boot. You do have an okay touch on the ball. It does feel medium to low connectivity in terms of foot to ball. So I don't know, let's see what kind of more aggressive movements into shooting actually feels like. So a little bit of shooting here. If we can get this, there we go. Kind of passing in, just getting that adductor warm, which will be good. I actually don't mind the passing feel with these. For me, like Tiempo 9, for instance, right? Decently thin leather upper, but had a nice little pass pad there. I'm not always a huge fan of those pass pads, but I do think that something like this that sort of sits in that thin, medium kind of width category, but that's got a really nice flex to it like this auxetic material does. I actually do think that it does have a pretty decent like ball contact when you're passing, even if it's not my favorite for kind of juggling style moves and touches. Now, one area that this boot actually feels really good for, nice, love that, is the heel area. And it may not fit everybody, but I do feel like the heel area in this boot is actually quite nice. It's definitely an improvement on the previous generation. And there we go, lovely. And I think that it locks me in pretty well. To be fair, that could be a little bit of a case of, you know, the fact that this auxetic material upper is wrapping my foot so much that it just like sucks my heel into the back of the shoe. So that could be, but if I look backwards, there's no weird spacing and kind of weird angles or gaps or kind of gapey holes that were there on the fourth generation of the Magnetico. All right, a little more solid shots here. We get the Ronaldinho drill going and just try to, hello. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I was afraid of, because that shot there where I'm trying to get like a lot of torque behind the ball and sort of hit it with that laces, that's where I would sort of expect a boot like this to have a lot more ping, where the boots are sort of so wrapped around my foot that I get that really nice crack to it. Not so much with these. That being said, shooting from an angle where it's like this, like that kind of shot feels a lot better. But that, like, I'll grab the last ball just to show you, more of that kind of knuckleball look to it, where I'm coming a little bit straighter of a run up. So I'm kind of coming around this way and I'm hitting it like that. Doesn't feel connected to the ball at all. And I don't think there's a difference in the width of material on the inside of my foot versus like kind of that lacing. But I don't know. I just don't feel as like connected as I want to be with sort of a knit slash knit style football boot. Right on, last little bit of shooting here. Get through the cones. I'm gonna juggle first just to kind of get that feel. And look, honestly, with this kind of thing, like these kind of touches, they feel, look, part of it could be because my feet are like pretty numb at this point. Although these fit me perfectly in terms of like how the sizing should be, this is like the right size in terms of where my toes are. This boot is it's almost like this is like shrink wrapping around my foot, and that is something that is not all that comfortable, if I'm honest. But you know what? We are out here and I'm doing my best to make it work. General comfort, despite it being tight, is actually okay. I don't mind the comfort. The lockdown is fabulous in terms of like lateral stability. That is one thing that these are doing very well, is any sort of lateral movement. Excellent. And then the other thing that I haven't mentioned at all, which has sort of gone completely under the radar for this boot review already, is the sole plate. Now, part of that, I'll do one more. Part of that is because I have already worn this sole plate probably 23 times between Magnetico 3, 4, and now 5. It's the same sole plate. On artificial ground, maybe it's because my feet are so wide, but the outside bottom stud nearest to the midfoot on the lateral side, on the outside, I'm getting a little bit of stud pressure. Again, that could be because my feet are spilling over the outside of the boot a little bit, but that area, at least on this turf field, is definitely not, right down the pipe, that's okay. Definitely not an area that I sort of, it's like that contact point. So as I'm coming to shoot, I'm like feeling that stud a little bit more. Overall, the sole plate's fine. It's not anything to write home about. I wish they would have changed it, but I see why this stud pattern was used on the Magnetico upper for some of the pros. Alrighty, free kick time. Try to get these into the top bins. Can you see that? Yes, you can. All right, here we go. Get a little bit of free kick action going. This is also what I just literally mentioned, is that motion here. So as I stamp down, it's that outside stud that I'm feeling a little bit of discomfort with. My toes are completely numb at this point, but you know what? We're gonna do okay. Ooh, that shot had like a little dip to it. Maybe that was a wind thing. But yeah, look, overall, I think if you have a wider foot and you want an Under Armour boot, which is totally respectable. I think Under Armour is actually doing pretty good stuff, and I'm wearing their kit right now. So like I actually really love the Under Armour brand. I think it's really good. I am always gonna pick the Shadow 3 over the Magnetico. I think the Shadow 3 is a lot better than the Magnetico. That being said, the Magnetico, if you wore the 4, which I don't think anybody did other than Rudiger, but he had a custom pair. If you had the 4, and you liked it, you're gonna really like the 5. But for the rest of you who are looking for a power / control boot and you want something that's a little more unique, I'd probably not recommend these. I'd probably recommend you go with a Pred or a Phantom 6, or if you want something that probably your friends don't have, that's maybe even better than those two, drop Skechers SKX2. All right, guys, jumping into conclusion time for the Magnetico 5. I'm honestly pretty excited to get these off my feet. That's not to say that these aren't generally a comfortable football boot. They're just incredibly tight out of the box. And I think they're meant to fit that way because I think auxetic material is uniquely designed to be super, super custom in terms of how it fits. And if you're gonna make an entire upper out of a sort of a material that bends to everybody's foot, I think this is a situation where you have to make it stiffer out of the box so that when people break it in, they have a really beautifully custom fit football boot. However, if it takes literally 900 kilos worth of force just to get my feet in and out of these boots, that kind of changes things for me. But if you look, I mean, that's actually pretty decently soft. I think my thing is that they went a little too hard on the polyurethane coating, and they've gone pretty hard as well on these grip elements, which I don't mind. It just makes for, I think they've done too much here. And I loved that with the Shadow 3, they went just back to simplicity, and they went back to a boot that is just a exposed knit upper with a little bit of graphic pattern on it. It fits pretty much everybody. Do I wish they would have done a different sole plate? Yeah, but I think this boot it's nearing the end of, we're like, okay, Under Armour auxetic material again. Do something new, please. Especially for a boot that's sort of meant to be a little bit more of that control/power boot. I have a lot of thoughts about what this could be, but it's one of those things that, you know, this upper is pretty thick for the market that it sits in. And although I do think it's a solid product, I just don't think anybody's gonna pick this over the Phantom 6, which is excellent, the Predator, which is excellent, and now the SKX2, which is excellent, debatably maybe better than the other two. And then you have New Balance Tequila, which is also excellent in this category. And it's like, okay, well, where does this sit? Pretty much at the bottom. And that's unfortunate for Under Armour, but I do think hopefully this video is a word of encouragement. I don't want this to be a I'm shitting on Under Armour, because obviously I really like the Under Armour brand. And I think what they stand for is really good. I just don't think this product is up to scratch with what's currently on the market. And I think they could do better than this. So hope you guys enjoyed that video. Hit that like button if you found it valuable. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, be awesome. Take care. See y'all in the next video.